everyone, I'm Sarah and this is BudgetSew, where we create stylish, fashionable looks as inexpensively as possible. Today, we're doing a sew along to McCall's 8007, View A in a size 14. McCall's 8007 was published in 2019 and is a pattern for pants with flared hems, belt carriers, and a fly front. View B has front and back patch pockets, and View C has contrast panels. I bought this pattern online in 2019 from the McCall's pattern website. It was originally $19.99, but I bought it on sale for $3.59. The link to the video where I purchased this pattern is right here at the top of the screen.
First, I set aside the waistband piece to be interfaced later. Since I was making 2 pairs of denim pants at the same time, I used my tailor's chalk to mark my pieces with the pattern company name and the piece name. MSF for McCall's side front, MF for McCall's front, MSB for McCall's side back, and MB for McCall's back. I pinned the center front seam in between the circle and the notch. I'm not going to make the front fly as indicated in the instructions. Instead, I'm going to insert a regular zipper, so from the top of the pants to the circle will need to be basted. Then I pinned the side front to the front. The fabric that I chose was a medium weight denim that I purchased at Lens Mill as part of a 40% off remnant sale. The fabric was in a bin of denim remnants that were sold by the pound. This denim caught my eye because it was 60 inches wide, had a bright red wrong side, and there was lots of it. Then I pinned the back darts and the center back seam on pieces 5, the side back. The fabric weighed 5.41 pounds and was $4.49 a pound originally for a total of $24.29. With the 40% discount, I paid $14.55, which broke down to $2.69 a pound. The link to my Lens Mill fabric haul video where I purchased this fabric is at the top of the screen. I used pins to mark the curved seams on the back pieces that needed to be stay stitched. Then I pinned the back pieces right sides together at the center back seam. At my Kenmore sewing machine, I sewed the side back pieces together at the center back seam. Since the recommended fabrics for McCall's 8007 are denim, twill, chino, and cotton blends, the Lens Mill denim I chose is perfect. Then I sewed the back darts. Since I had 5.41 pounds of denim, which worked out to be just over 4 meters, I had plenty of fabric left over for other projects, including Vogue 9282, wide leg jeans, and Vogue 8405, a lovely full-brimmed sun hat. The videos for these sew-alongs are already posted on BudgetSew. Check out my Vogue 9282 jeans with a link at the top of the screen. Next, I increased my stitch length and stay stitched the curves on pieces 6, the center back. My 2 denim pants makes are quite different. Vogue 9282 is a pattern for semi-fitted pants with no waistband, a back zipper, and leg variations. Views A pants are cropped above the ankle. View B and C are full length. Views A and B have slits at the hem with buttons. This pattern has all sizes in one envelope. The pattern sheets are grouped for sizes 6 to 14 and sizes 16 to 22. Since I made my Vogue pants in a size 16, I gave the pattern pieces for the 6 to 14 to my mom so she could make a pair too. I made View C but moved the back zipper to the front and lengthened them by 4 inches. Then I sewed the back pieces, or pieces 6, together at the center back seam. I made a couple of alterations to this pattern. I lengthened the McCall's pattern by 4 inches as well, along the lengthen and shorten lines on the lower legs, and I changed the fly front zipper to a regular zipper. I just didn't want the extra fabric of the fly, so I thought I'd install the zipper the same way as I did with Vogue 9282. Next, I sewed the front to the side front. I love the dark blue color of the denim. Whenever I buy denim, I'm always drawn towards the dark blues. I've never bought a light blue or a pale blue. I've always preferred the navy. My next step was to pin the back piece to the side back piece. This turned out to be a little more challenging than the instructions made it seem. The pattern simply says, pin back to side back, right sides together, matching notches and clipping side back where necessary. Easy enough on paper. In reality, I was trying to pin two opposing curves together, which always takes a bit of patience. I decided not to clip the side back pieces because I had flashbacks of the trouble clipping caused when I made my Vogue 8992 wrap dress. Instead, I took my time, matched the notches carefully, and eased the curves together with plenty of pins. I checked to make sure the basting was done so that the front zipper could be inserted easily. Back at my sewing machine, I sewed the side back to the back. I started out rather quickly sewing the straight seam of the leg, but slowed down quite a bit when I got to the curve. I decided to use red thread for these jeans because the wrong side of the fabric is red, and I thought it would be fun to sew with something other than navy. What I forgot to do before I started sewing was check how much red thread I actually had on hand. It turned out that my thread box contained just one spool of Gutermann 347 in crimson. When I realized I was running low, I called my mom and explained my predicament. Luckily, she had several spools of red thread in her sewing stash and generously offered to lend them to me. Since we don't live very far apart, we met halfway between our houses so I could pick up the thread and get back to sewing as quickly as possible. I was surprised by how much thread this project used, and it became clear that my supply wasn't going to last for long. To avoid running into the same problem again, I placed an order with Fabricland online to replace the spools I borrowed from Mum and replenish a few other sewing essentials. As often happens when shopping for sewing supplies, my order ended up being a little larger than I originally intended, but that's part of the fun. If you'd like to see everything I picked up, I've linked my Fabricland online haul video at the top of the screen. As you can see, I took things slowly. I stitched a few inches at a time, stopping occasionally to make sure the layers were still aligned and that I wasn't accidentally creating tucks or puckers. Curved seams like this can be unforgiving, so I didn't rush the process. By taking my time and following and easing the fabric through the machine, I was able to get a smooth seam that followed the curve nicely without any puckering. Looking at the finished seam, all that extra patience was definitely worth it. Once I was satisfied with the curved seam, the rest of the leg came together much more easily. I moved on to the straight leg seam, which was a welcome change after wrestling with those opposing curves. With everything lined up properly, I was able to sew the seam quickly and without any issues. With the seam sewn, my next step was to clip the curves along the side back to back seam. Because the seam follows a pronounced curve, the seam allowance can bunch up and create bulk if left uncut. By carefully clipping into the seam allowance, I allowed the fabric to relax and conform to the shape of the garment. This helps the seam lie flat and makes it much easier to achieve neat, even top stitching. One of the details I was looking forward to was adding top stitching. The pattern instructions call for top stitching the side front seams in step 21 and the side back seams in step 27, and I decided to sew these rows of top stitching using my red thread. It's amazing how small details like this can completely change the appearance of a garment. A row of contrasting top stitching adds visual interest, highlights the design lines, and gives a handmade garment a more professional, designer-inspired finish. As my mom's Simplicity sewing book from 1975 explains, your garment's style and individuality are determined to a great extent by the design details that provide the finishing touch. The book goes on to say that details such as top stitching, bias binding, matching self-fabric closures, and trims are often the first things that catch the eye. And I think that's still true today. I've used decorative top stitching on other projects as well. When I made the pants from Simplicity 8999 and New Look 6203, I used a blue queen size sheet for the fabric and top stitched the seams with emerald green thread. The green stitching really stood out against the blue fabric and transformed what could have been a very simple pair of pants into something much more distinctive. For these jeans, the red top stitching serves a similar purpose. Not only does it coordinate with the red wrong side of the fabric, but it also emphasizes the shaping seams and adds a custom detail that makes the finished garment uniquely mine. Compared to the side back seam, the side front seam was much easier to top stitch. The seam line is completely straight, so I didn't have to worry about easing the fabric around the curves or maintaining an even distance from the seam as the shape changed. Instead, I simply guided the fabric through the machine and stitched a neat row of red top stitching down the front of the leg. The red thread just pops on the navy blue fabric. It highlights the seam lines, shows off all that careful top stitching, and gives the jeans a custom look that you simply can't buy off the rack. My next step was to insert the zipper. No matter what type of garment I'm making, I always hand baste my zippers in place before taking them to the sewing machine. I found that spending a few extra minutes basting saves me from having to rip out crooked stitching later. To begin, I placed the zipper face down on the wrong side of the front of the jeans and pinned it securely in place. Once I was happy with the positioning, I reached for some vintage thread wound on an old wooden spool and used it to baste the zipper by hand. I like using older thread for jobs like pattern marking and basting. It's a great way to use up thread that may no longer be strong enough for permanent construction seams while still keeping it useful. For the actual sewing, however, I always use fresh, good quality thread. I also made a small change to the pattern at this stage. Rather than constructing the traditional fly front as instructed, I chose to install the zipper the same way I did on my previous pair of denim pants. This is the method that I used on my Vogue 9282 pants, and I was very happy with the results. It's a simpler approach that still gives me a functional zipper closure while avoiding some of the extra steps involved in sewing a fly front. I know that hand basting isn't everyone's favorite step, and it can feel a little old-fashioned in the age of sewing clips and fabric glues, but it's a technique that has served me well over the years. A zipper is one of the first things people notice on a pair of pants, so I like to take the extra time to get it right. Hand basting allows me to check that the zipper is straight, that the top edges line up properly, and that everything lies flat before I commit to machine stitching. If I discover something isn't quite right, it's much easier to remove a few hand stitches than a line of machine stitching. It's also a nice reminder that sewing doesn't always have to be rushed. Sometimes slowing down for a few minutes can actually save time later by preventing mistakes and reduce the need for seam ripping. Before I could sew the zipper, I needed to swap out my regular presser foot for a zipper foot. A standard presser foot is too wide to get close to the zipper teeth, but a zipper foot lets me sew right alongside them without the foot getting in the way. Taking a moment to change the foot helps ensure that the zipper is sewn evenly and operates smoothly once the pants are finished. With the zipper basted in place and my zipper foot attached, I was ready to start sewing. I began stitching on the right side of the fabric, sewing slowly and keeping the edge of the zipper tape aligned with my stitching line. When I reached the zipper stop at the bottom, I stopped with the needle down in the fabric, lifted the zipper foot, and pivoted the jeans. This allowed me to stitch neatly across the bottom of the zipper and secure it in place. Once I reached the opposite side, I stopped again, lifted the zipper foot, and pivoted the fabric a second time, and stitched up the left side of the zipper. Taking my time around the corners helped me keep the stitching even and prevented the zipper from shifting out of position. Since I had already basted the zipper by hand, everything stayed exactly where I wanted while I sewed. Once the zipper was securely machine stitched into the jeans, I carefully removed the hand basting stitches. This is always one of my favorite moments because the zipper finally starts to look like a permanent part of the garment rather than something that's just pinned in place. With the front and back sections of the jeans completed, it was finally time to join the legs together. I laid the front pieces on top of the back pieces with the right sides facing each other and began pinning the outside leg seams. As always, I started by matching the notches, which help ensure that the shaping lines up correctly and that one piece doesn't accidentally get stretched out more than the other. Once the notches were matched, I worked my way along the seam, carefully aligning the raw edges and adding pins as I went. This seam was much easier to pin than some of the curved seams I had worked on earlier in the project because the outside leg seam is mostly straight. It was nice to have a straightforward step after spending so much time easing curves together and checking for puckers. As I pinned, I took a moment to admire how the jeans were starting to come together. Up until this point, the project had been a collection of individual pieces, but joining the front and back sections together made them finally start to resemble a pair of pants. I always enjoy this stage of garment construction because it's the point where you can begin to visualize the finished project. Before I could sew the side seams, I needed to finish the stitching remaining in the front of the crotch seam. Earlier in the construction process, I had left this section open so that I could install the zipper, and now that the zipper was securely in place, it was time to close the gap. I carefully aligned the center front edges, making sure everything matched up properly at the zipper opening. This is one of those small steps that can have a big impact on the finished garment. If the seam isn't aligned correctly, it can affect how the zipper lies and how the front of the jean looks when worn. Once everything was lined up, I stitched the remaining section of the crotch seam, connecting it to the stitching that had already been completed. With the center front seam completed, the front of the jeans was finally taking shape. The zipper was installed, the front crotch seam was finished, and I was ready to move on sewing the side seams. It's always satisfying when several construction steps come together and you can see the garment starting to look more and more like a finished pair of jeans. Then I sewed the side seams. While working on these jeans, I was reminded of some advice from my mom's Simplicity sewing book from 1975. The book says, "The key to proper fit in pants is advanced planning. Major adjustments must be made on the pattern before cutting into your fabric, as they cannot be corrected later. Minor fitting corrections may be made in the final fitting." I think that's excellent advice, and it's something I've learned through experience. Once you've cut your fabric, your options become much more limited. Small adjustments can often be made during construction, but major changes usually need to be planned before the scissors ever touch the fabric. For example, if you need to lengthen the crotch, deepen the rise, or add width through the hips or thighs, those adjustments should be made to the pattern pieces before cutting. These changes require additional fabric, and if the fabric isn't there, there's only so much you can do later. Taking a few extra minutes to compare your measurements to the pattern, make any necessary alterations, and create a fitting plan can save a lot of frustration down the road. It's much easier to adjust a paper pattern than it is to remake a pair of pants after they've already been sewn together. With the outside leg seams completed, it was time to move on to the inside leg seams. I laid the front and back pieces right sides together and began pinning along the inseam, carefully matching the notches and center seam as I worked. Even though the inseam isn't one of the most visible seams on the finished jeans, it's still an important one. This seam runs from the crotch all the way down to the hem, so taking the time to line up everything properly helps ensure that the legs hang correctly and that the jeans feel comfortable when worn. I like to start by pinning the notches first because they act as checkpoints along the seam. Once those were matched, I worked my way between them, aligning the raw edges and adding additional pins where needed. Once I was satisfied that everything was aligned correctly and lying flat, the inseam was ready to be sewn. At my Kenmore sewing machine, I sewed the inside leg seam. For this project, I used a Schmetz jean needle in size 100/16. Whenever I'm sewing denim or other heavier fabrics, I like to switch to a needle that's specifically designed for the job, rather than trying to make a universal needle do all the work. The size 100/16 jeans needle has a stronger shaft and a sharp point that allows it to penetrate thick layers of fabric with ease. Since the jeans included multiple layers of denim at the seams, I wanted a needle that could handle the extra bulk without bending, skipping stitches, or breaking. I'm happy to report that the Schmetz needle performed beautifully throughout the project. It stitched through the denim smoothly and consistently, even when sewing over thicker seam intersections. I didn't experience any skip stitches, thread breaks, or other issues, which made the sewing process much more enjoyable. A good quality jeans needle is a small investment that can save a lot of frustration when working with denim. In this case, it did exactly what it was supposed to do and helped make sewing these jeans a smooth experience from start to finish. Before attaching the waistband, I decided to do a fitting check. Whenever possible, I like to try on a garment before completing the final construction steps because it's much easier to make adjustments at this stage rather than after everything has been finished. I slipped the pants on and was pleased with how they were fitting through the hips and legs. However, I quickly noticed that once the waistband was added, these pants would become quite high-waisted on me. That's not necessarily a problem with the pattern, it's more a reflection of my body shape. I'm short-waisted, so waistbands often end up sitting higher on me than they do on a model or on the pattern envelope illustration. As I looked at the fit in the mirror, I realized that I preferred it where the top edge of the pants was already sitting. Now, if I added the waistband as drafted, the pants would rise above my natural waist, which isn't the look I was aiming for. I wanted a comfortable fit that sat at my waist rather than above it. After giving it some thought, I decided to use the waistband pieces as facings instead of as a traditional waistband. This allowed me to finish the top edge neatly without the extra height that the waistband would create. It's a simple modification, but one that can make a big difference in how a garment fits and feels. This is one of the reasons why I always encourage people to try on garments during construction whenever possible. The fitting stage gives you an opportunity to evaluate the pattern on your body and make adjustments that suit your preferences. Patterns provide a great starting point, but sometimes a small change can turn a good fit into a great fit. Once I decided to use the waistband as a facing rather than a traditional waistband, I folded the facing to the inside and pinned it down, taking my time to make sure the edge was even all the way around my waist. I also paid close attention to the zipper area, making sure the facing was lying flat and wasn't creating any extra bulk. A little extra care at this stage helps the waistband sit smoothly against the body and prevents it from rolling or shifting. With everything pinned securely in place, the top edge of the pants was looking much cleaner and polished. I was really happy with this modification because it allowed me to keep the waistline at the height that was comfortable for me while still giving the inside of the garment a nicely finished appearance. Then I sewed the waistband down. For this project, I used my vintage Kenmore sewing machine. Even though I own newer machines with more features, there are times when nothing beats the power of a good vintage machine, especially when I'm working with heavier fabrics like denim. One of the things that I love most about my Kenmore is that it's built almost entirely of metal. It has a solid, sturdy feel, and it doesn't seem intimidated by thick fabrics or bulky seams. As I worked on these jeans, the machine sewed through multiple layers of denim with very little effort. There were several places where the seam allowances overlapped, creating quite a bit of bulk, but the Kenmore handled them beautifully. The stitches remained consistent, and the machine fed the fabric smoothly without struggling. That's one of the reasons I keep coming back to this machine for projects like jeans, bags, and other heavy-duty sewing. It's amazing to think that a machine that's decades old can still perform so well. Vintage sewing machines were built to last, and this project was another reminder that older tools can still do excellent work. With the inseam sewn, my next step was to clip the crotch seam allowance to reduce some of the bulk. The crotch seam is one of the areas of a pair of pants that sees a lot of stress and contains several layers of fabric coming together, so it can become quite bulky if left untouched. Using my scissors, I carefully trimmed and clipped the seam allowances where needed, being careful to not cut through any of the stitching. Removing some of this excess fabric helps the seam lie flatter and makes the inside of the garment more comfortable to wear. Next, it was time to pin up the hems. As I pinned, I checked that the hem depth was consistent and that both legs were the same length. To finish the seams, I sewed 2 rows of top stitching around each leg. Double rows of top stitching are a classic detail on jeans, and I wanted to include that feature on this pair as well. I started with the first row of stitching close to the folded edge of the hem, taking my time to keep the stitching straight and even. Once that row was complete, I went back and sewed a second row parallel to the first. Keeping the spacing consistent between the 2 rows takes a little concentration, but the extra effort is worth it. The red thread really stood out against the navy blue fabric, creating a striking contrast that highlighted the hem and tied in beautifully with the other top stitch seams throughout the jeans. It's one of those details that may seem small, but it adds a lot of visual interest and gives the finished garment a more authentic denim look. As I stitched around the hems, I was reminded of how far the project had come. What started as a stack of fabric pieces was now a wearable pair of jeans. The double top stitching was one of the final finishing touches, and seeing those neat rows of red stitching made the jeans look polished, professional, and ready to wear. Here are the finished jeans.
wearing a Tommy Hilfiger top that I bought from the Hudson's Bay Company. The shoes are Comfort Dex Flex wedge heels from the Payless shoe store, and the necklace was a gift from my mom. I bought the earrings in a Ziploc bag full of jewelry for $5 at a church Christmas bazaar. I bought the Liz Claiborne purse from Value Village thrift store and then repaired the handles. The link to the handbag handle repair video is right here at the top of the screen. I hope you enjoyed my sew-along to McCall's 8007. Thanks for watching. See you next time.